Okay, lesson for today. Toward the end of the year, we revisit what you should see at this point as the dreaded passive voice. Dreaded because each time it appears within your writing now, you lose points. However, you may have noticed over the past, and I've been marking the passive voice even when I wasn't taking points away for it. I've been marking it since day one with the first writing. You didn't know what it was at first, then you learned what it was, and you learned how to proof for it, use Microsoft Word's grammar check, and so on. But nonetheless, sophomores see the passive voice as a problem because it continues to lead to point loss. So yes, some of you are taking a look at past writing, and I just gave you a piece of writing back. If you have some past writing, you want to keep that on your desk to look for the PASS marks, that would be great. Sarah, if you're looking at your rough draft, I circled them, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Some of you may have noticed that I fail to mark certain instances of the passive voice. And you might think that I was just running through too fast. I did not see it. That's a possibility, but it's a low probability because I see them. I'm tuned to see them. Some of them are not unacceptable uses of the passive voice. Some of them are acceptable uses. So the question today is, how can you turn the dreaded passive voice into your friend, the passive voice? Because on occasion, the passive voice is acceptable and sometimes desired in writing. I have spent a year training you and emotionally abusing you to the point where hopefully you'll be attuned to the passive voice and want to rid yourself of it. And hopefully at this point you are attuned to it. But now I should say, sometimes it's unavoidable and sometimes it's desirable. So let's talk about some of the different ways in which it is desirable or unavoidable. When should you use it? Always, right. The passive voice should be used by me in every sentence that is written by me. There you go. Wouldn't that be lovely if we spoke that way? No, I'm sorry, if words were spoken by us that way. Laughter is being expressed by Tim. Happiness is being experienced by Mr. Clarkson. Okay, enough of that. When should we use the passive voice? Yeah. Oh, good. Okay, so a lot of people... My smartboard. My smartboard. Yay! A lot of people notice that in scientific writing, you can use the passive voice. In fact, quite often, it adds to the clarity of what you're discussing to use the passive voice. Yes. Give me other instances that you might have learned that I might have dropped throughout the year. No? That's it? I haven't mentioned anything before? Because occasionally students come up to me with these questions when they are being rather astute, and I answer those questions. Okay, so here's one area that you might have experienced it. If you're in science research, especially here at Southview, you've learned a lot about scientific writing, and somebody like Mrs. Kobar or Mrs. Tipping has probably said, yeah, I know Clarkson does that. Don't worry about that here. We'll get to that usage in a moment. Let's start with this first one. You use it when you victimize the subject. And remember, by subject, I mean grammatical subject. When the subject of the sentence is being victimized. When you want that subject to feel passive. Some people think that they're victimizing a subject. Here's one way to know. The verb is negative. The verb is an overly negative verb in its connotation. Verbs like murder, destroy, pillage, rape, kill, eradicate, injure. These are verbs that are not negative in the sense of negative affirmative, like not kill, not injure, but they're negative in their connotation. So if you're using a negative verb and you want that negative verb really to hit your subject, then sometimes you use it like that. So it's toward the end of the year. I think we need a revisit from Booby Miles. So we haven't laughed at his name in a while. Booby Miles was injured when making a simple play in a scrimmage. What's the subject of my sentence? Emily? Correct. And what's the verb? Was injured. Very good. Abby, who's doing the injuring? Yeah, some other player or that play itself. injured him. Very good. It's unclear, possibly unknown. Abby, does it matter? So what am I going for in this sentence? What do I really want my reader to focus on? I want to focus on the suffering that Boobie Miles experienced, and the passive voice brings that out better than anything else. If I say other players injured Boobie Miles, what do I now want my reader to focus on? I want them to focus on the other players and possibly their moral characteristics. That's a different sentence saying something different. Here, I want the victimization of Boobie Miles, so I use the passive voice to bring that out. Oh, good. This example sometimes applies to the scientific writing that Chris was referring to. Use it when the agent of the verb is unknown or irrelevant. I don't know who's doing this action, nor do I care who's doing this action. I was inspired to write a sentence based upon the recent tornadoes and flooding and devastation in certain parts of our country. If I was saying that several personal items were found floating in the flood waters, Paul, who do you imagine was finding these? Oh, good. News media. Ryan, who else might have been finding these? Very good. Residents. Let's see. Zoe, give me a third agent who might be finding these personal items. We've got news media on the scene. Residents. Who else? Police. Excellent. Any others? Tim, right. General rescue workers. Very good. Yeah. Paul. Looters. Excellent. Excellent. Although they wouldn't find, they would take. But yes, they find before they take. You are logically correct, Paul. So I don't know who's doing this. I don't care who's doing this. What I'm trying to indicate is that people lost these items, and these items just were found. Eventually, they were just sort of floating. The fact that they were found, the passivity of that, indicates some of the tragedy, indicates some of the victim nature of this, and furthermore, I don't know who's doing it, so I leave that out. Use it also when you know the agent of the verb. Agent, remember, means the actor, the person who's doing the verb, the agency is doing the verb. Use it when introducing the agent of the verb would distract the reader from the important subject and add an idea to the discussion that is irrelevant. Notice that all three of these rules they kind of overlap, because we could say the same about the Boobie Miles sentence. Introducing those players would distract me from the fact that I'm talking about Boobie Miles, and I don't want to do that. This is often also the reason in scientific writing you don't use it. Okay. In scientific writing, often the process itself that is happening is relevant to your scientific lab report, but the person doing it, the experimenter, is irrelevant. And introducing that experimenter makes this more like a story of an experiment rather than a dispassionate, objective, scientific examination of process. There we go. Cyberbullying is seen as the most serious social problem in schools today. April, who's seeing it that way? Give me one person or agency or group that would be seeing it as the most serious social problem in schools today. Principals, excellent. Administrators. School administrators see cyberbullying as the most serious social problem in schools today. But I want to emphasize cyberbullying, and I don't want to talk about those principals. I don't want to talk about the administration, at least not at that point. Perhaps later I do, but right now I want to talk about cyberbullying. But I want the idea that people are approaching it that way. I don't want to say cyberbullying is the most serious problem. I want to say that people are approaching it as the most serious problem. So I kind of want the best of both worlds. I want the idea that somebody's looking at it, but I want to prioritize it as the subject, and I don't want to distract my reader with an unnecessary agent. So I use the passive voice. These instances that we're talking about are finely tuned understanding of what you're going for with a reader. This is not just haphazard, I'm using the passive voice because I don't want to think about actually revising my work. This is mastering the sentences. This rule here also applies when you want to maintain a consistent focus on the subject. So if I'm talking about cyberbullying and cyberbullying and cyberbullying, and I've got 10 sentences in a paragraph and 8 of them are devoted to cyberbullying, then I'm probably maintaining a consistent focus on cyberbullying as my subject. If shifting to a new subject would seem inconsistent, it would seem to violate parallelism. Suddenly I've got cyberbullying as my subject, but then I shift over to school administrators and back to cyberbullying. Perhaps that inconsistency, that lack of parallel structure, would throw my reader off. So I use the passive voice to keep cyberbullying as my subject. Finally, we use phrases, we create constructions in grammar where the passive voice is acceptable, common, and revisions just seem strange. Students have often approached me and say, Mr. Clarkson, how would I revise this? And I said, there's no way to revise that, and that's just how we speak. Keep it. Like that. How would you revise that out of the passive? Tim? My mother gave birth to me on a Monday, or technically my mother bore me on a Monday, which is really strange. Yeah, my mother gave birth to me on a Monday. No, I was born. Another one that's a common construction is in marriage. We were married. How would you revise that? Okay, you could say I married her or I married him, correct? A priest, because technically the marriage is a ceremony performed on you. Somebody's performing that ceremony. So if you want to be literal about it, you've got to say the official married us, which seems all strange to us because it sounds like now we have a three-way wedding, the official and the two of us. But that's just how we speak. So there are common constructions that you don't want to mess with. Just use the passive voice. You have 4 different reasons for using the passive voice. I am aware of these reasons, and I'm aware of why you might use them and when you should use them. And I still mark as many passive voice errors as I do. What I'm saying with those marks is that those uses of the passive voice are unnecessary. Don't conform with any one of these 4 rules. Some people have tried to identify errors in my writing in some of the IRA model essays or short writings. They said that's the passive voice. And I've been very frustrated because I said, well, I haven't taught the lesson yet, but that's an acceptable use of the passive voice. So now if you see me using the passive voice and you think, hey, I think Clarkson made an error, that's possible, and try it to earn credit, but also apply one of these rules. See if anything there works. This is where we're talking about much more sophisticated levels of understanding writing, which is really what you guys are ready for. Questions? So, and grab your past writing, please. As much of it as you've got.